Right, so I've got my base here. I've only made a short one because I only want to do a demonstration on how this thing goes together. So I've made a piece that's what, 200 long, 210, doesn't matter. So what we want to do is we just want to put a couple of rules across here so that we can sit our sheet on top of it without it falling through on us all the time. Gets really frustrating if you can't hang on to it. Now when we put this together, this top face here, because it's sitting down onto this edge here once we pull the rule out, will be flat, so that we know that this top panel is going to be flat. But this panel on the side here that we're welding to the top can weave in and out slightly if we're not careful. So this is 2mm wide. I want to overlap my sheet onto it by about 0.5 mm, and that's where I'm going to tack it. So that all the way along this gap here, or along this edge here, I want this the top piece to be overlapping the side by 0.5 mm. If I have it 0.5 mm here, and then 1 mm here, and 1.6 here, and then 2 here, you're already starting to put a weave into it, or a bit of distortion into it. So by keeping the gap uniform along the side, you're actually going to get a nice flat face across this face here when you put a roll against it. It will actually be pretty flat. As flat as you can get it. The top will be flat, as I say, because it's sitting down onto a flat edge anyway. Now, the thing that once we've got this sitting on here, the points that need to be really accurate is that we want to put a roll across here, and it wants to be flat across this little edge, flat right across this face, and flat across this face. We don't want any large gaps or anything like that. All three faces must be flush and level right across there. If you start getting them sitting slightly forward or slightly below, you're going to get an uneven surface across here, and it's just going to make an absolute mess. So when I put this on here and get it flush across here, I have a slight gap across here at this point here. I'm not even worried about that. What I want to do is I want to put a tack right out on this edge here, and I want to start working down the seam. So my job is to get it flush on the top, across the top face, put a tack here, work my way down, start on the other side, put a tack right at the top corner and work down that outer edge, and then I can come back and I can dress these corners or fill them in with more wire to fill up the gaps. So the critical face, as I say, is right across there, flat, right across those three faces for a start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start TIG tacking all the way down here. I'm going to put 1 or 2 tacks in at about sort of 50mm apart, and then I'll come back and I'll start to tighten them up. So what I need to do is I need to start tacking down this edge. Now the easiest way when you're learning to weld is to sit the ceramic onto the surface. The tungsten's sticking out a little bit too far. I'm just going to push it in. What you want to do is you want to sit the ceramic onto the surface and just rotate the torch in until you get the tungsten close to the surface, pull the trigger, and it will do a tack. It only sort of takes about less than 1 second to do a tack. The two surfaces must be absolutely touching right on the edge. You cannot have one surface sitting out from the other or the other one lower. They must absolutely touch. And if you get them touching and you just radius your torch into position and pull the trigger, it will flash across and do a little wee tack. So you're not going to see that because I'm going to do it. So tack number 1 is in place. I need to move my rule out of the way, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find another place where it's got roughly that overlap here up the top end of about 0.5 mm. There's another place here that's going to be 0.5 mm. I'm pushing down on the top face. Very, very quick. Coming right down to the bottom, putting a tack down here. So I've got 3 tacks on it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to step along here and do these tacks. I'll put one in between. So I'm just going to step along here and do these tacks at about 10mm apart. Now, if you look at the tungsten, it's gone and formed a ball on it. It's the spatter off the surface. I'm welding electro-galvanized sheet, and when you weld galvanized sheet, zinc is very volatile, and when it gets to a certain temperature, it starts to spit, and it spits off little bits of metal, and they get stuck right to the end of the tungsten. So you have to take the tungsten out, and you have to sharpen it. So I've tacked this edge. My tack's, 10, 15 mil apart on 2 millimeters Intex, good as gold. I'm flush across the top corner here. That's where I needed to be absolutely flush, those two faces, getting these flat here. Got a bit of a gap here, can fill that in with wire. So going to the other side, once again, now that I've got one side tacked, I can probably get rid of one of the rolls because it's already got a bit of strength in it. So I need to line the top up again at this point here, and I need to put a tack right on this outside edge here. Probably go off screen. So I've got one tack there. When I'm coming down these sides, I'm coming down to the start of the radius, and I stop at that point. And then what I'll do is I'll start to line up the base across the bottom. It's slightly hanging over on one side, and yeah, it's slightly hanging over, which is a good thing because I can give a torque on that. So what I'm going to do now, it's got a tack there, I can just push it in and out with my hand until I get to the position I want and put another tack on it. So another tack there, come slightly further up it, put another one. Come right down to the start of this radius. It's got a wee bit of a gap there. So what I can do is I can tap that out. If it doesn't, what can happen is when you tap these things, they simply bounce backwards and forwards. If you have too big a gap, what you can do is you can put a small bit of filler wire in there and do a fuse it across so that you've got a joint there. When you stop, you can give it a smack with a hammer and the wire will close that gap up. It'll pinch it up, and because when it pinches it up, it will hold it. It won't spring back because there's a bit of wire on it. Either that or do a tack it right beside it. There's 2 or 3 ways of doing these things. So right at the top end here, I can put my roll across here and it's flat from one side to the other, which is what I wanted. What I've done is I put a tack right at the top and one at the bottom. I've got a slight gap here. I could dress that in with a hammer, tapping it in, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to fill it up with wire so that I've got a reasonably squarish corner. Same on the other side, because it's flush here, it's actually in a really good position. I will put a tack at the top and a tack at the bottom, and I'll fill that in with wire. On the other end, we're actually pretty close to having the correct size gap here, right around the corner, probably to about halfway, and then this piece is starting to overhang here. So I need to trim that up because I want to keep the base as flat as possible. So what I would do for this one, I would get in here with the sander and I'd sand as accurately as I could at a 45-degree angle from basically about the centre out to the outside edge and just around the corner, so that I actually cut this face back. It's hanging over in the corner about, feels like a millimetre. So I need to take off not only that millimetre, but also down another 1.5 mil into the 2 mil. So I need to cut this edge back 2.5 millimetres, and that way it will still overlap the material on the base by 0.5 millimetre, which is what I've sort of got up that side and along this side. So from roughly about the middle, I need to cut back to 2.5 at this point from virtually nothing at this point. So I'm taking off very little here, taking more and more off back to the corner at 2.5 mil and just around the corner. And what that will do, it will leave me a face on an angle that comes down on an angle, but when I tack them together, this edge will melt into that one, and then I can, and when I weld it up, I won't have any trouble. So I'm going to do that. So I cut it back. Trick is not to cut down into the vertical face too much. You just want to actually cut that back on a slight angle so that there's a very small amount hanging over, but it's not insurmountable to tack it together. So it's sitting there nice and flat currently. So around the top edge with the tacks on it, you can get a hammer and tap on all the tacks and it'll squeeze the two surfaces up together for welding. The next shot shows that I'm going to backstep weld it, so I've numbered it from 1 to 2 to 3. I will start at number 1 and work back to the end. Then I'll start at number 2 and work back on to number 1, 3 back on to 2. So it's backstep welding all the way. This helps reduce distortion in the end once it's actually fully welded up. So it's called backstep welding. Just work from one weld back onto the previous one. Run it at about 68 amps. You don't want to run it too hot, otherwise the weld will actually slump away. If you run it slightly colder and put plenty of filler wire in, it'll actually build it up enough to allow you to sand it off and give you a nice square corner. And then finally just tidy up the vertical edges and the horizontal edges, tack them together, and I'll show you how to sand it in the next video.